Okay, so we are in the book of Judges on page 325. So the book of Judges comes right after Joshua, and if you guys remember what happened with Joshua, so the Israelites were walking around in the desert looking for the promised land, and then they saw the promised land, and Moses sent 12 people to go scope it out and to see what was going on there, and 10 of the 12 came back complaining about the giants, that there's these huge giants there, we can't do anything about it, it can't be the promised land, there's no way we're going to win. But then there was 2 people, Joshua was one of them, that came back and said there's incredible abundance there, there's grapes the size of basketballs, and so they're excited to go into this land because the Lord told them that this is the land that they had prepared for them. Yes?
It says grapes.
Huge grapes. Like, yeah, it does. It says huge.
I
Maybe.
always said that grapes, they were going to be huge. I told my granddaughter, huge grapes this big in heaven. And her nana said to me, is that biblical? I go, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's where I got it.
There you go.
Yep.
Yep. Huge grapes.
Even though it was a promised land. Okay.
They do
Thank
have,
you.
they do have some grapes, plants in Israel that are really putting out these big, huge grapes like this. It's like I've seen one.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they moved into the promised land, and Joshua was basically their leader. And then we get to Judges, and towards the beginning of this book, Joshua passes away. So in chapter 2, Joshua passes away. So we're actually going to start out on 301. We're going to read a little intro to the book of Judges. The conquest of the promised land under Joshua had been a miraculous success. It wasn't long, however, before the people forgot what had made it all possible: faith in God and obedience to his commands. They became trapped in a 4-step spiritual cycle. They fell into sin, they were enslaved by an oppressor, they cried out to God for help, and God sent a leader or judge to deliver them. At the end of each painful round, there was a temporary period of faithfulness and stability, but soon, most of the people slipped back into the same vicious cycle of relapse. The book of Judges shows what happens to a society when its citizens do whatever they choose. The people of Israel refused to learn from their past mistakes. They blinded themselves to the need of others and to the command of God. As a result, they became trapped by their individual delusions and brought suffering on themselves and the people around them. They refused to follow the path of freedom by obeying God's program for righteousness and healthy living. Doing things our way still leads to enslavement and suffering. Following God's program is the only path to freedom. Let us learn from Israel's mistakes. We would be wise to note that Israel's failures often came after great victories. Success is sometimes the first step towards a fall. We must humbly take inventory of our activities and relationships, keeping our eyes on God and obeying his will for us. But when we do fail, we can be sure that God will listen to our cries for help. He wants to deliver us once again. So there's this whole, especially when it comes to entering the promised land, this whole idea like we've arrived over here. Now it's like, whatever, you can just do whatever. And I like the 2 parts there that say they blinded themselves and they brought suffering on themselves. Because when I was in that cycle of, okay, I'm doing better, now I'm not doing better. Okay, I'm doing better, now I'm not doing better. It was so easy for me to point the finger and say, well, if that horrible thing didn't happen to me, then I wouldn't have went back and done this thing. Or if that person wouldn't have spoke to me that way, then I wouldn't have dropped an F-bomb or whatever. It was always, and that goes back to the beginning of time, when God confronted Adam and said, bro, why'd you eat this apple? And he's like, well, the woman gave it to me. The woman you gave me gave it to me. So instead of accepting responsibility for his own actions, he blamed somebody else, which is so common in my life too. It's so much easier to try to look up out there and say that's what's wrong instead of looking inside of myself. So again, that's the same thing with the Israelites when they're walking around in the desert. They were blaming Moses and saying, you took us out of Egypt so we could die in the desert, and instead of accepting that they were walking in the desert because of their own mumbling and complaining. That the Lord was trying to take them right there, but then the mumbling and complaining got them out of that. So another thing that I noted here was that we as humans, we learn best from mistakes, but fortunately they don't have to be our own mistakes, which is why I'm so grateful for this book, because pretty much every single mistake a person could make is in here. Actually, I would venture to say every single mistake a person could possibly make is in here. And you can read how they got to that point, what the tipping point was of it, and then what the consequences were of it, and then how the Lord delivered them from it. So it's super helpful to study this book and recognize that it's like, because you hear people say, well, I wish there was what's it called, a manual for this life, because I don't know how to do it. Ta-da! Here's your manual. Go ahead and read it, because it has everything you'll ever need to know about how to live. And the reason that that's possible is because God came and put on human flesh and walked it out. So he knows all of those temptations. He knows the physiological, the body's response to those temptations. And he knows with the Holy Spirit how to get out of it. So now we have that Holy Spirit dwelling within us, so we can get out of it too. So we don't have to make the same mistakes as these people. So in chapters 2 to 5 times it says the Israelites did evil in God's eyes. So it's like that cycle, like they're doing good, and then all of a sudden, let's build this golden calf and worship that instead of God, whatever that metaphorical golden calf is. Yes, maybe I might not be, drinking or taking drugs anymore, but sometimes I spend way too much time on Facebook. Should I be on Facebook or should I be in the Word? Well, is it an idol? Is it coming in between my relationship with God? Maybe. It might be. So that's just something that I have to constantly be mindful of, and I would challenge you all to constantly be mindful of that too, if anything's coming in between your relationship with the Lord, because that's essentially what it means, that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So then it says it one more time at the birth of Samson, which he is our main dude for this Bible study here. His parents were unable to become pregnant. So they had been trying for a long time, and that's a frequent thing as well. The Lord just seems to really like to do that for people that believe that they're unable to bear children. The Lord likes to swoop in and give those people a child, because that was, I would venture to say, one of the most important things in Israeli culture in those times, to have heirs, to carry on your family name and your legacy. So when people were unable to conceive, that was devastating for them. And that was an opportunity for the Lord to just, show his magnificence and show his grace to people. So an angel came to Samson's mother, she's not named in here, and said, do not cut his hair. You're going to become pregnant, and do not cut his hair, because he is to be a Nazirite. So the Nazirites were a different class of followers of the Lord that were very devout. Like, they would never drink wine, they never cut their hair, they would spend all day in the Word and studying the Word and convening with the Lord. Another notable Nazirite in the Bible was John the Baptist. So he would spend all his time out in the wilderness eating honey and bugs. So, because he was just that devoted to the Lord. So the Nazarites usually didn't have much, if any, place in their lives for things of the world. They were just extremely devoted to the ways of the Lord. So Samson was to be a Nazarite, and his name means of the sun. So a little backstory on him. So he's born and is following these Nazarite ways, and they were at this time, with all the different judges and things, they were, I don't know if they were under the rule of the Philistines or if they were just in close proximity to the Philistines, but he saw a Philistine woman that he was attracted to, so he went home to his parents, and he basically like whined to them like a spoiled little brat. Like, I want this woman. Go get her for me. I want this woman. Like, I could just see him stamping his feet and telling his parents he wants this woman. And his parents are like, well, we'd really prefer you to find an Israelite woman, because the Philistines worshipped the idols, different lowercase g gods that it was a mess. So he went back and met with this woman again and like had a conversation with her, and he really liked her. So he went back again, threw his little temper tantrum. I want this woman. So they arranged the marriage for this woman, and Samson told a riddle to the Philistines and said, if you can guess this riddle, I'll give you like 30, I don't know, sparkly jackets or something. And if you don't guess it, then you got to give me 30 sparkly jackets. So they're Philistine people. So they go to his wife and they say, listen, your husband is trying to trap us up in this riddle. Why don't you tell us what the answer to the riddle is? Why don't you get it out of him? He's your husband. So she bugs him and bugs him and bugs him and bugs him and bugs him, and he finally tells her the answer to the riddle. And then she goes back and tells the Philistines, and they answer the riddle, and he's all, mad about it because he's a spoiled little brat. And then he goes and he kills some Philistines and takes their sparkly coats and gives them to the guys. And then he's all mad about it. It doesn't say sparkly coats. That's my artistic liberty. I think it's tunics and something. But so he's mad about it, and then he goes back to his parents' house because he's so mad about it. So he just married this woman. They're supposed to be in their honeymoon period, but she does something that ticks him off, and he again slams the door and stomps off back to mommy and daddy's house. And what this reminded me of was, I believe it's Genesis, where the Lord's talking about the unity of marriage, and how when a man leaves his parents, he cleaves to his wife. So prior to that, the man would be cleaving to his parents because that was his source of relationship there. So obviously Samson did not completely leave his parents and cleave to his wife. So anywho, after he got over his little temper tantrum, he went back to get his wife to bring her like a TV dinner goat or something. And she had married the best man from his wedding, because his father thought that he had abandoned her, that Samson had abandoned her. So he married her off to the best man in the wedding. So Samson was looking around, and that brings us to chapter 16, where our study starts. So that was the backstory.
He said for the riddle, you will give him 35 linen robes.
Right, sparkly coats. Fine linen robes, yeah. So we're going to start in chapter 16, verse 4.
What page is that on?
That is on 324. So some time later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines went to her instead, entice Samson, to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So mind you, they're not married here, but he fell in love with her, and she is also a Philistine. So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely." Samson replied, "If I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, I would become as weak as anyone else." So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. She had hidden some men in one of the inner rooms of her house, and she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Afterward, Delilah said to him, "You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now please tell me how you can be tied up securely." Samson replied, "If I were tied up with brand new ropes that had never been used, I would become as weak as anyone else." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them. The men were hiding in the inner room as before. And Delilah cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were thread. Then Delilah said, "You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up securely." Samson replied, "If you were to weave 7 braids of my hair into the fabric of your loom and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else." So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. Then she tightened it with the loom shuttle. Again she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson woke up, pulled back the loom shuttle, and yanked his hair away from the loom and the fabric. Then Delilah pouted, "How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong." She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. Now, right there, I thought of Proverbs 27 and 21, where it talks about a nagging woman is like a continual dropping, and it's better to be in the corner of a house than a huge house with a nagging woman. So just to say how this can wear away at a man's resolve. So finally, Samson shared his secret with her. "My hair has never been cut," he confessed, "for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else." Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine rulers. "Come back one more time," she said, "for he has finally told me his secret." So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap. Then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way she began to bring him down and his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, "I will do as before and shake myself free." But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes.
Wow.
They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in prison. But before long, his hair began to grow back. The Philistine rulers held a great festival, offering sacrifices and praising their god, Dagon. They said, "Our God has given us victory over our enemy Samson." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy to us. The one who killed so many of us is now in our power." Half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring out Samson so he can amuse us." So he was brought from the prison to amuse them, and they had him stand between the pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the young servant who was leading him by the hand, place my hands against the pillars that hold up the temple. I want to rest against them. Now the temple was completely filled with people, and the Philistine rulers were there, and there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof who were watching as Samson amused them. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the 2 center pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, "Let me die with the Philistines." And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. Later, his brothers and other relatives went down to get his body. They took him back home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, where his father Manoah was buried. Samson had judged Israel for 20 years. Woo! Okay. So that's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, even though it's kind of messed up. So, like, the moral of this story is, again, like I was talking about at the beginning, that I might not be drinking or using drugs, but there's other things that can be just as intoxicating. Because Delilah was able to get him so drunk with love that somebody was able to shave off his head.
Yeah.
So recognizing that is really important. Let's hop over to our footnote. The love affair between Samson and Delilah is one of the saddest examples of a dysfunctional relationship in history. We are told that Samson did love Delilah, but Delilah clearly valued money above their relationship. It should have been obvious to Samson that Delilah was working with the Philistines to destroy him. But to get the physical pleasures he craved, Samson led Delilah on, staying in a situation he should have run from. He blindly believed he was virtually indestructible. This left him open to utter humiliation and suffering. If we hope to succeed in recovery, we need to recognize our weaknesses and avoid situations where we are vulnerable. So like it says, he should have run from this situation. And there's been a saying that's been on my mind the past few weeks in reference to something totally different, but it's applicable here. If you're on a diet, don't go to a buffet. It's like, why, if you're on a diet, why would you go to a buffet? So it's a lot of people that I've come across in recovery, my friends and things, and myself too, once I stopped drinking, thought that I could go to a bar because there's live music. You can just, go hang out and listen to the live music and whatever, it's fine. I'll get a water or soda or whatever. But another good saying that a friend of mine uses is, if you go to the barber enough, you're going to end up getting a haircut. Exactly. So recognizing that, and it seems that Samson may have had like that addictive personality, but maybe not towards wine, maybe towards the women, because it seems like, the first woman he saw and he's like, I gotta have her, and then this next woman he sees her, I gotta have her. So recognizing that those destructive behaviors don't necessarily just correlate with drugs and alcohol. There's another little thing over on 321 that speaks about Samson and Delilah. The New Testament describes Samson as a man of faith. It mentions neither his failures nor his great strength. Though he possessed great physical strength, he was a moral weakling, following his own selfish desires and ignoring God. Samson spent most of his life pursuing his own goals, but in the end, he finally admitted his need and cried out for God's help. It seems that after the first 3 episodes of betrayal, Samson would have known not to trust Delilah, but like many of us, Samson thought that giving into manipulation was an expression of love. He chose to please Delilah and get what he wanted from her rather than obey God and deliver his people. Delilah chose to use her relationship with Samson for her own gain. It was clearly a dysfunctional relationship. Most of us have experienced the pain of being used, and we have undoubtedly used others. We have also known the agony of being betrayed. It will do no good to look at Samson and think about what he did not accomplish. We are often victimized in our own lives by thoughts of what might have been. Samson shows us that as long as we have life, we have hope. It is never too late to turn our lives over to God and allow him to redeem and restore what has been lost. In spite of his failures, Samson is listed as a champion of faith in Hebrews 11. In spite of our failures, we too can be champions of faith as God continues to work out recovery in our lives. So that's a huge deal. Like the majority of the stuff that talks about Samson is not flattering. It's not flattering things. And again, that's something that we've discussed here before, that it seems like a pattern of God, that he likes to use people that that we would look at. Again, if we're choosing people to be on our dodgeball team, they would be the last people we would choose. But the Lord looks and he's like, that's my guy. So God used Samson for this. And then at that last moment there when he's in the temple, that reminds me of when we cry out to Jesus to come in and be the Lord of our lives and, you know, our Savior, that we become a new creation. And that, like it says here, his shortcomings and his weak points are not even mentioned in the New Testament. That all of those things where, you know, he's walking around like a spoiled brat and hanging out with the heathens, and that none of that is mentioned, but he's described as a man of great faith. So recognizing that that is something that we can claim as well, that regardless of how we behaved in the past, regardless of the things that we may have done or the things that we may not have done, that when we come and we cry out to the Lord, that he's right there with us. And it says one of the scariest things that it also said for King Solomon, after he had been repeatedly disobedient, that the Lord had left him. That's like one of the most terrifying things in the whole world, to know that. But even though the Lord left him, that when he cried out in his moment there, the Lord was with him again, and he was once again in communion with the Lord, and recognizing that that's something that we can claim as well. So the devotional today for our step 1 work is entitled Dangerous Self-Deception. So step 1 is, we admitted that we were powerless over our problems, that our lives had become unmanageable. When we refuse to admit our powerlessness, we're on 325 again. When we refuse to admit our powerlessness, we are only deceiving ourselves. The lies we tell ourselves and others are familiar. I can stop any time if I want to. I am in control. This one won't hurt anything. Or I can just have one and I'll be fine. And all the while, we are inching closer to disaster. Samson was one of Israel's judges. As a child, he had been dedicated to God, and God had gifted him with supernatural strength. But Samson had a lifelong weakness, the way he related to women. Samson was especially blinded to the dangers he faced in his relationship with Delilah. His enemies were paying her to discover the secret of his strength. 3 times she begged Samson to tell her his secret. Each time she set him up and tried to hand him over to the enemy. 3 times Samson lied to her and was able to escape, but each time he got closer to telling her the truth. Remember, the last time he said something to her was something to do with his hair. So
to sew it in the thing.
Yeah. Finally, Samson revealed his secret and was taken captive and died a slave in enemy hands.
Mhm.
Samson's real problem can be found in the lies he told himself. By not admitting his powerlessness, he remained blind to the obvious danger that his pride and desire for beautiful foreign women were leading him into. This caused him to gradually inch his way towards an untimely death. We need to be careful not to fall into a similar trap. As we learn to acknowledge our powerlessness over our addictive, compulsive tendencies daily, we will become more aware of behaviors that will likely lead us to destruction. So, the biggest thing is ownership. It's ownership of, first of all, that I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing, something that's not helpful for me, something that's not building my relationship with the Lord. And the second part is surrender, which again, Samson did ultimately surrender at the end there. He was able to get back with that relationship with the Lord and to reestablish his connection with the Lord right before his death. But as it said, it was an untimely death. So I'm grateful that we're all here and that we have all decided to take that first step in admitting how much we need God and how powerless and useless and messed up we can be without him in our lives. And also recognizing the gifting that Samson had, and that each of us does have a gifting that the Lord specifically made us for. Like each one of us has a specific purpose, and he's known that since we were in our mother's womb. He's known that purpose that he has carved us out for. A lot of the time, we can muddy that up. It's again, I like using the analogy of a radio. Like if the Lord's radio station is 97.4, if I'm on 97.4, then I can hear clearly. But if I go up to 97.5 and I do that, like I said, my thing right now is scrolling through the stupid short videos on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. And recognizing that when I do that, I tune my internal radio to 97.5. And I might be able to catch a word here or there, but I won't be able to get the full message, and I won't be able to get the directions that the Lord has for me. So Ephesians 2:10 talks about these good works that he's laid out for us. So he knows our whole life from beginning to end, and he specifically put things and people in our path that we are specifically designed to relate to and to maybe help bring them to the Lord, or maybe they're going to help us better recognize the path that we're on. But if I've got my radio tuned wrong, I'm not going to be on the right path. If I'm thinking about the ways that I've messed up in the past, or worrying about the things that might happen in the future, I'm taking these things and putting these blinders on my eyes. So I can't see what the Lord has over here for me. And then he showed me this one day. It was devastating that he allowed me to feel, I think, just a tiny bit of his emotion when I walk by one of those good things that he laid out for me. That he's like, oh, she missed it. Like he made this good thing that would have just made my life better and fuller, and I was focused on something else and I missed it. And he put it in my heart a little bit, I think, of what that feels like for him when I'm not focused on him. So honesty, self-honesty is so important, and that's why gatherings like this are so important, to talk about things that we wouldn't necessarily talk about with our friends or with our family because of different judgmental things or whatever, because of fears or whatever it is. So to have a good group of people to prevent that bogging down with self-deception. Because what happens is, the longer I tell myself a lie, the easier it is to believe. So having this opportunity, and again, having accountability partners. Because if I walked in here and started acting a certain kind of way, I know you guys would call me out on it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, and I would do the same for you. So that's how we can stay out of that self-deception, and how we won't get to the point where we've tuned our radio so far that we can't even hear the voice of the Lord.